All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our budgeting session for 2025. My name is Amanda. I'm going to be talking us through everything today. So we'll go through the basics of budgeting, the process from scenario to actually getting them applied to the accounts. Before we get started, I do have my chat open. So throughout the training, if you have questions, please feel free to ask questions either in the chat or you can certainly unmute and ask a question if you'd like, whatever you feel comfortable with. But definitely, if you have questions along the way, just let me know. All right. All right, so our first order of business is we're gonna go take a look in the wiki where we can find the walkthrough. This is, my favorite first place to start is in the wiki. We're gonna go to USAS documentation. And once we're in the USAS documentation, we have the different menus here. So we have budgeting, scenarios, proposed amounts. For budgeting, the easiest way to get to the actual walkthrough of the entire budgeting process is to click right on the budgeting page. And it'll take you to our little page that shows scenarios, proposed amounts. Here's a little description of each. But this green box at the bottom gives us, click here for the steps to proposed amounts for next fiscal year. And here for making budgeting adjustments in the current fiscal year. Now, we do this training every year pretty much. This has been a regular one for us. So I changed up how I'm going to talk about what I'm going to show today a little bit from previous years. And what I want to do is I noticed we were talking about adjustments first. We were kind of doing our first example with the adjustments because adjustments would happen for the current year. If we did that at this point in time, for example, we would be doing adjustments for 2025. And then when we're budgeting for the new year, it's going to be for 2026. Which, don't get me wrong, that's a great process to view and show. But I know right now we're kind of looking at the budgets, everyone's getting ready to budget for 2026. So we kind of usually spend the most time on the first example. So I figured I'd switch it up this year. We're going to, I'll touch on adjustments at the end, but we're really going to focus on the next year budgets today. I know we have the recordings out there from the past, so 2024 gives a good example of adjustment. So if anybody's watching this later and is looking more specifically for an adjustments example, look at the budgeting training from last year. But for this year, we are going to focus here, proposed amounts for the next fiscal year. So I'm just going to open this in a new tab so that we have that ready. However, before we move on, I want to talk about the two pages that are most important here. So one of the reasons we have the walkthrough compiled on a separate page is because throughout the budgeting process, there are going to be multiple places that you're using, that you're looking at. The first place that we are going to be is in the scenarios. I think we'll probably spend most of our time there today. And how I like to think of the scenarios is as basically as like your working area. It's your work zone. Everything that you're doing in scenarios, until you take another step to push it out of there, anything you put in scenarios is not affecting totals anywhere else in the software. It's just in scenarios. It's just those little working areas that you have. So we see here allows for the creation of budget scenarios via spreadsheets, which we'll focus on that, which can be promoted to proposed amounts. Let's see. Yeah, okay, we'll see the rest on scenarios for when we get in there. Then once you go, so the scenarios is where you're going to start. That's your work zone. That's where you build the framework of the start of the budget. That gets promoted to proposed amounts. Once you're in proposed amounts, that does count as your next year proposed. we're gonna see how as soon as it goes into proposed amounts, it does have a place that it can show on the actual account screen. So that is going to be, you know, a step where it's still kind of a work zone, but it's a little bit more solidified at that point. It does have spots where it can be seen elsewhere in the software, but you're not fully committed yet at that point. You still can make updates, you still can make edits, and then once it's applied, that's what's going to push it to be the budgets for the date that you choose. In our example this time, as of July. So with that, let's jump into the process. Here is our walkthrough. And, you know, I probably won't be flipping back and forth and actually talking through each step, but the steps that I'm going to show coordinate with these steps. So if you're following along with the training, or if you are, sorry, if you're following along with the training, or if you're doing this later when you're, you know, when you're actually walking through the budgeting process, then these are the steps that you can follow through as you're working. Okay. All right. So into the software we go. Sorry, I can adjust my little light here a little bit. It seems a little bright. Okay. Alrighty. So I'm getting logged into USAS here. And where we're going to go is, see, we have our menu for budgeting, scenarios, and proposed amounts. So everything kind of in this nice little section for you when you're doing your budgeting. If we go to scenarios, so this, again, this is like your work zone. As we go along here, when you come to this grid, it's going to save any like previous scenarios that you have, whether it's for the current year, previous years, or once you start working on future years. The other thing I want to mention as we're talking about scenarios is keep in mind, and we'll talk about why a little bit later, but keep in mind that generally, there, of course, there are different ways that you can do things, but generally, all the budgets that you want to push forward for the new year would be contained in one scenario. We're going to talk about later on when we start promoting to the proposed amounts, but at that next step, it's going to push everything in the scenario and overwrite what was previously there. So I know sometimes when people first start working with these, or in certain situations, it may be tempting to say like have one scenario for budgets, one scenario for revenues. That could cause problems, or you know, it's one of those things where I'm being kind of coy here because it's not that you can't do it, but there's specific situations where you have to understand what it would do if you do that. So is it possible? Yes. If you're starting out with budgets, or if you're not as familiar with budgets, you're getting a handle on how you want to do it, what I would suggest is have everything for the year in a scenario, in the same scenario. You can have multiple scenarios for a year, but I think of that more as a situation where it may be this budget or it may be that budget. Scenario number one is based on negotiations going one way, and then scenario number two is if they go a different way. So something like that. So if there's like, it's either this is going to be my budget, or here's like a completely different iteration, that's when I would have different scenarios. Okay. Now, once you have some years in here, which at this point, I think that a lot of people will. Oh, hang on, let's see. We have a county that requires anticipated revenue to be posted in July, but usually expenditure budgets don't get posted until later. Those districts have to do this. Andrew, that is a good point. And, you know, I would say, so it's a little bit difficult because we're talking about at this point in the year, right? When if they're going to be posting now. And I guess this still may apply. The key here is that once we get to the proposed amounts grid, we're going to talk about how that shows in the next year proposed. So in that case where it's revenue and versus expenditure, and then if it's also you're not hosting the next round until July, then that's not really that much of an impact. So that's a scenario where it may make sense. And I feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that's a good point. I'll mention that again when we take a look at that. Yeah, that's why it's so tough because I do, and I mean everyone does it differently. Um, the system certainly has the flexibility to do that. So yeah, I'm generalizing sometimes when we talk about the like generally this is how they do it, and I know it's not going to be every scenario. So every scenario. Okay, back to the scenarios in in the software versus my tangent here. Okay, so once you go in, what we have in here, again, we do this budgeting training regularly, so I have all of my budgets from previous years in here. And we can create a brand new scenario if we just wanted to start from scratch. And I just click the create at the top of the grid. Or if I close this, I could go into my last year budget, so fiscal year 25. I'm just going to click to view that. And I have this clone option on the top where I can click and then clone my previous year scenario. I'm going to click that because it is going to take a minute. What it's actually doing is it's going to go in, it's going to make a brand new scenario, but it's copying not just this header information, but also every row I have down here. Now mine is just a sample, just like an example scenario that we're working with, but realistically, they may have sheets that equate to all of their accounts. So this could take a minute and that's okay. I would just like click it, let it process. The other thing is it is going through and pulling, and again, get a little ahead, but I want to see this, is we have some totals fields here, and it is going and pulling the fiscal to date, the prior years, depending on what you have configured on these budgeting sheets. So that's all happening at that clone option. So if anyone clicks clone and it takes a while and there's a lot of sheets in there, or they have a lot of accounts, it might only be one sheet, but if it's all of their accounts, that could take a while. So let it go, it'll complete. And then what you have here is a brand new scenario. So I have my old one, I have a new one, and this one gives me the ability to make modifications. So let's give it a name. Very, very creative, but now we'll keep consistent. And then this fiscal year right here, this is required, but you'll see in the background here, I have it on the grid. So this one is more of like a reference field where I could sort and filter on my grid to pull up all the scenarios I have from one year. So you'll go ahead and enter your year in there. All right. Okay. Just make sure you don't miss anything. Oh, this is what I want to mention on this step. See, this is why I make sure to put some of these things in my notes here. I want to make sure to mention, because we're going to dive in, we're going to look at these budgeting sheets, take a look at what we have in our list. However, once you clone, I would just go ahead and save this right away. I've found that when I'm in here working, and maybe partially because I'm, talking to you all while we're doing this, but I'm sure that, when anyone is working on their budgets or cloning or whatnot, like you could be interrupted, step away. Right after you clone, it doesn't actually save the new scenario until you click save. So I would just go ahead and save it once for good measure after I give it my header information, and then just hop back into edit mode and we can continue on. Okay. Okay, so let's actually talk about first, I know we have some budgeting sheets here, but let's talk about creating a new budgeting sheet that we're going to add to our list just so we can kind of see how these got here. let's see, we have a question. What is the best guidance for updating budgets in the middle of the year when the district wants fiscal year to date expended updated? Um, so do you mean expendable, Brenda? Are you looking to update like the expendable amount, or do you mean the expended amount like within that you're seeing within the sheets?
So right now, a lot of the districts are updating budgets.
Uh-huh.
And, so when they come into the budgeting scenario, they have their last year's budget that they pull up. Well, that still shows, figures from then, from when
Okay.
they originally did it. So they want to show current expended figures, on their sheets so that they can budget when they pull it up. So that's why I was curious. What's the best way to do that?
I would say so. There are a couple options. We're going to talk about regenerate, but you have to so like if I were to edit this, regenerate will pull figures, but that wipes out any budgets that are in there. I mean, they're probably going to enter new figures for the adjustments anyway. I'd say you have a couple options. So if they have something like, I'm just going to pull up, if they have like an adjustments scenario that they already have that they're working with, then each sheet they could use the regenerate, and that's going to update any fiscal to date figures to be the current figures.
Okay, and that's what I had them did. They didn't have any adjustment sheets, but they had their original FY25 budget. And
Okay.
so I had them regenerate the sheets, to create
Yeah.
so it updated the figures and then go from there. But I didn't know if that was the best way to do it or if there was a
Yeah.
better way to do it.
Alternate, and no, I'm with you here though. Alternately, if they have something like this where they have a budgeting sheet already, they could actually just use this clone option. So like they keep their original budgeting sheet, they clone this, and again, it's gonna take a minute, but when they clone it, it'll have all of this, like if that's what they're using anyways, is the same sheets that they budgeted from originally. When they clone that, that does pull the current year figures. That is going to pull the current fiscal date. So that saves you the step of having to regenerate all the sheets.
Generate. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was wondering as you were doing that, if that would
Yeah.
work, because that
Yeah,
seems
I think that would
simpler.
definitely work. Yeah. The
And
one part you gotta, oops,
clone
sorry.
it, would you want to keep the fiscal years 2025 then?
So yeah, I'd put 2025 here. The other part, and we're jumping around here, but this I just want to mention while we're talking about this is when we look at this edit, this field is gonna default to the next year. So if you're
Okay.
doing adjustments, you would come in here, and so you would have to change that on each of the sheets, but they're probably going to be entering in numbers anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what I think that would be a really good solution is to just use the clone. Okay. Let me find, I don't know where I put our original scenario here, so let's open it back up. Great question. All right. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is let's take a look at the bottom here. We have the create option. And so this is where our spreadsheets, this is basically like the ones that we see in there were built using this tool. So I am going to make this, give this sheet a name. So this is what's going to show in the grid we were seeing at the in the scenario. Note at the top here we have select type. So we have budget, we have anticipated revenue. We'll notice here and when we get to the proposed grid that budget and anticipated revenue like sort of appear separate, like they're in different like grids. One thing to just remember is that everything is together, budget and revenue, if they're in the same scenario. The reason that we see them kind of like separate where you can either make a sheet for one or the other is simply because they have different account codes. So because those receipt codes are shorter, they only have some of the pieces. That's why like when you're at this step, you have to specifically choose either budget or revenue so that it can pick the correct account code pieces for you. We'll stick with budget. And then once we get in here, this kind of looks like our account creator, or I'm sorry, not account creator, like a report creator. And what we're seeing is this grid right here, select properties, is going to determine which fields we're seeing. We've kind of dabbled in opening it up a little bit and seeing all of those fields, the fiscal to date figures, That is all determined by when the sheet was created, what were the fields that were chosen on this grid. So you see we have our item codes here. Now, what we can do is we have the ability to modify these. If we want, if there are certain figures we don't need, like let's say we don't need the encumbrance, let's get rid of the unencumbered balance. But we definitely want our fiscal to date expendable. We want our fiscal to date what we actually spent. We have our prior year. But if we scroll down here, I could also add 2 years prior, and I just click and drag to add. 3 years prior, click and drag to add, and there you go. And so this would determine the fields that I'm seeing on here. I have some other, I'm not going to go too deep into these other columns, but we have sort part. This is basically the sort of what order those accounts are going to appear in. And then let's go to configure filter. So this is deciding which columns are in our in our sheet. The configure filters is deciding our rows. So what actual accounts are being included. And what we can do is use this to add filters. So I am going to go ahead. So open accounts, open code, and add my OPU. I'm making this a high school sheet, so I'm just going to do, I know I have an 001 OPU with some accounts, so we're going to do that. I also want to filter active equals true. Okay. So I only want accounts that have this OPU that are active currently. And let's save that up. This says, you know, creation of the budgeting sheet is going to run in the background. It may take several minutes. I know I have a pretty small group of account codes here, but that may not usually be the case working in a live situation. All right, so we've successfully got that sheet created. It adds it onto my list here. And let me expand this so we can see a little bit more. And so we have the sheet name. That's what it was given when it was created. And then we have a file name as well. And let's see. Okay. Oh, I do have a note there. So when we are talking about creating the budgeting sheet, when we're talking about the accounts that will pull, keep in mind, so we said, you know, we want the ones with these OPUs, we want active accounts, we're going to go in and be looking at them, but keep in mind that it's only going to pull existing accounts. Again, scenarios, work zone, we're not touching anywhere else in the software. What that means is if you have a situation where new accounts need to be added for the new year, that should be done ahead of time through the account grid or through like a load. There are some different options there for creating accounts, but that is not done through the budgeting, through the scenarios. That would be done ahead of time so that the accounts are already there and can be pulled when you get to this step. So that would be the order of operations there.
Hey,
All right.
Amanda.
Yes.
So does regenerate pull the new ones in?
So in a situation where if you created your sheet already and then you add a new account and you hit regenerate, that would qualify, and then you regenerate, yes.
Okay, cool. So you could clone from the previous year and then regenerate, and it would basically bring you up to date while keeping all the filters that you had pre-built.
Yes. Yes, and that's a really good point. And I kind of wanted to mention it at some point, but I feel like this is a good time is, you know, we just looked at creating that sheet. I know I have some other ones in here. I know when you're in here, you know, creating the sheet, like especially some districts may have a lot of different sheets. They may break it down by buildings, by their different departments. So going through and setting up each one of these sheets, like I totally understand that is a bit of work because each one you set up, you would come in, you know, you're going to add, okay, I want to add these fields. I want to remove these fields. Here's going to be the filter for one. But if they take a year and get that set exactly how they want, then there's a lot of work that they're not going to have to redo because of that clone option. So, you know, I totally recognize that it can be a bit of work to set up, but I do think that there's a payoff in future years.
Yeah, they just got to be careful with the we find this with like the mapping. They'll throw like the special cost center, like the fiscal year. You know, it's
Oh,
like leave like that's like I'm just saying it so that when people listen to it on the recording, because that's bitten me so many times. Is like I teach somebody something and then they've like hard coded the special cost center's fiscal year in for the grant instead of
right,
kind of doing wild cards to make it work.
right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, and that's why we added that active filter as well. So let's see. I'm going to show an example with the regenerate too. So we'll see. So I'll try and throw some of these into, you know, mention those when we look at it as well. So let me open this up because we've previewed our edit mode here, but this is next on my list. So I just clicked that edit button on, this is my high school sheet. And what this does is this lets us see, now this, remember we defined the columns, we defined the rows. This lets us see everything that we have in our sheet. This does work similar to an Excel sheet. We can click in here, we can update if I wanted to add a figure. This last column here, I know that kind of came up earlier. It's PA, so it's proposed amount. That's the big important one. That is what I want my budget to be, is the proposed amount. And the year is important. So in this case, we're budgeting for the next year. It's going to always default to the next year based on your current period. So 2026 is what we want in our case. But as we were talking about earlier, if we wanted to do adjustments, that header would have to be changed to 2025 in this case, because it's 2025 currently. So, and that can just be changed manually by clicking and typing in there. The other thing I want to mention is that these, while you're editing in here, these fields can take formulas like Excel. So we have, like, this is our last year fiscal to date expendable. If we wanted to do equals and that column and just make it the same as it was last year, we could do that. If we wanted to make it the same plus like a 2% increase, that's how we do that, then we could put in a formula for that. This can also be just dragged down. You just click the bottom corner. So if you had a big list, you could just drag it down and then have that calculate for all the rows in your list. So those are options for if you do kind of have simple sheets and you want to edit right within the sheet, that can be done. Let me see. Okay. Bella asks, does regenerate work with imported budget expense sheets? Many treasurers prefer to use that option instead of creating the worksheets through the scenarios, or would they need to add the ID column to the report definition? So great question, Bella. I do have this on my list too, but let's talk about it now real quick. Is so upload at the bottom here, because we did a create. We added our budget sheets with the create, and that's what gave us that report writer looking page, right? If you use the upload, we have some worksheets in the walkthrough, in the budgeting scenario steps that you can download or that can be downloaded and then used from the report manager, populate budget sheets, and then uploaded with this option. If you use this upload option, you do not have the ability to regenerate. And the reason why is because you haven't done the step that tells it what to pull. Your report is coming from a separate spot. So the answer to your question is no. If they use the upload with the budget expense worksheets, no, they don't have regenerate. However, you're going to have that report definition in your report manager. They could just rerun the expense worksheet from the report manager, and the point in time they run that report would pull current figures. So it's not exactly the same as what we're looking at in the scenarios, but there is an option to rerun the report. When we're looking in here, let's also talk, I see you mentioned the ID column. So let's also talk about this. Good question, Andrew. Okay, y'all are getting a little ahead of me. Let me, I will answer that, I promise. So here's the ID column. And there's a bunch of numbers, big long ID. This is what the system uses in the background to basically link to this account code. So for the purpose of this, like I would just say, especially if you're editing within the sheet, just ignore it, leave it there. What it does is it's basically like a key code that means this account. So if I'm working in here and I delete a column or something, like say I accidentally, deleted information out of here, and I have a big long column that's got a bunch of different values. So I'm like, oh my gosh, what was that? Do I have to go try and repopulate whatever I accidentally deleted in this column? Well, if I have the ID, I don't, because this still knows what all the account code pieces were supposed to be. So the ID column is basically kind of like your safeguard. But if you have all of your account code pieces filled out, do you technically need that? No. Do you technically need the ID column? No, as long as you have all of these filled out. So that's what that's about. Let's go back here. Okay. Let's go back here and let's talk about the regenerate. And then I'm going to talk about these download and upload buttons on here. So first of all, regenerate. What this is, when I click this, is it's going to, it'll allow you to either add or remove properties, first of all, on this page, or it will allow you to just re-pull the figures. So, and kind of what we've been talking about, especially when you're doing the budgets for next year, for 26, you may come in here, set up all of your budgeting sheets, but then by the time that you actually want to, pull those and then start looking at them with the different buildings and departments, those fiscal to date figures are now from February, but say you're doing it in March, you could come in here and just regenerate, save the sheet, and it's going to pull updated figures based on whatever fields you have in here. Additionally, and let's see. Additionally, with the regenerate, this is when you could come in and if you needed to change any of the properties. Oh, this is what I was going to mention, or any of the filters. So when you regenerate, say this was the situation that was brought up earlier where there is a field for special cost center. Special cost center is, like the special cost or equals, and that special cost center has to do with the previous fiscal year. So say it's like you're regenerating a sheet, it had 9125 in it because last year, that was last year's code. This year, for 2026, the special cost center is updated. You can update that at the regenerate step if you remember. So that is an option. And then save the sheet, and it's going to go ahead and pull the updated data. Again, it'll look at this filter, what's active. It'll look at, the accounts matching. So the other thing I want to do at this point is let's just go look at our accounts in the grid, because I have an example of this. So let's see here, accounts. Okay, so here's our expenditure grid. I do want to note I have show active unchecked so I can see both my active and inactive accounts on this grid. And we can see I have my general fund. I have an 018. This one is not active. And then I have my 300 account. So if I come in here, see I have the 3 general fund accounts and my 300 fund. And that is because those are the active ones that match my OPU. So that's what it pulled from my account grid. But if we come in here, let's make this one active. We just want to have like a visual example here. Make that active. Okay, boom. That one's back up and running. You know what? I should double check. I'm gonna double check the higher up accounts because just in case. Active, true. Okay. So my expenditure account now and the accounts above it, I just wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally have an old cash account or something there, is now active. So I think I can do this without refreshing the rest of the page. So let's try it. So here is my high school sheet, and then again, active, when I save this, it should go ahead and see that new active flag there. Okay, I click edit, and then we open this up and see now I have this account. So just wanted to give a visual. I know we had the question earlier, like if you added new accounts, in this case, if we made the new account, or if we made one of the accounts active, then, you know, we can see it's picking that up when that step actually happens. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about downloading and uploading these different sheets. So I'm going to go ahead and click this download button. Just opened up here. And so a download goes right to my downloads. I can open it in Excel. And it's going to open on my other screen. So give me just a minute. Okay, when it comes over here, we got to click enable editing. And now we are looking at same data. We have all the same columns that we had in there. And that's, you know, very similar. Now, again, we have the ID here. I would say, you know, with it definitely depends. Like, I know, especially once you get this out of the software, if they're using this sheet to, you know, work with staff to get the budgets together, like that could be confusing. Again, as long as all of these columns for the account code remain intact and correct, then you don't really need the ID column. But it is a good safeguard. I've seen some situations where it is good that that was there. So, you know, you could even just hide this. Another thing that I've heard of once you get to this step is because they may want to have totals. Sorry, I kind of messed up my spacing here. They may want to have different totals for some of the accounts, different labels, like if they're going to, you know, if the district's going to meet with their administrators to set their budgets, they may be reviewing, you know, different pieces of this. Sorry, now I'm distracting myself, but I just wanted to be able to see this. Okay, all right, there we go. So really what we're looking at here, so we take it out, this is everything that comes out of the software. In order to import it back in, which we'll see in the next step, the account code or the ID, so this or these, and the PA column, those are really what you need to import back in. So at this point in time, when you have this sheet, they could go ahead and maybe copy this into a Google Sheet, or if they have like a shared Excel, you know, something that they're going to be able to give access to, you know, the administrator at the high school or athletics, so that that person can view their figures and they can maybe, you know, format it however they want and that sort of thing. But in order to import it back in, so here, I'm going to highlight the tops here. So this column, and then either the account codes or the ID that we had. So yeah, so I think this step right here is when there's probably a lot of other things going on. outside of the software. So once we get everything put out, so let's go ahead and put in some figures. So this one we'll make that, and then let's put in okay, so we've got our budget figures now in the sheet, and we could go ahead, let's save this, and we can import it back in. This will give you a warning. Warning, this operation will overwrite the existing sheet. Replace the current sheet. And I can say, okay. I'm going to choose a file. And once I choose that, I do start upload. And this uploads the sheet back to that row. So if I take a look here, oh, look, it brought in my highlighting. Actually, haven't tried that before. So it has, we can see it has my figures in here. The other thing you can do is if you did want to remove some of these lines, so say in Excel, here, let's do it. Let me unhide. Let's see if I can unhide this. Okay. So say we no longer want this first row in here. Or actually, let's delete the 300 because that's easier to see. So we'll delete the last row. And then I'm going to take off the highlighting now. That kind of throwing me off there. Not that it matters, but you know. Okay, and then save. And then if I go ahead, ooh, nope, that's the wrong button. I want to upload. So I'm going to upload back. Do we want to override it? Yes. And again, I deleted the row out of my budgeting sheet. I'm not deleting the account or anything. My account's still fine on the account grid. I'm just removing it from my actual budgeting sheet. So that has my figures. So that is a way that you can use the download. They would budget at that point and then upload them back when they're ready to get these populated. Okay, so the other thing, now let's go to Andrew's question here from earlier. If you create, then download, then upload, will that work? I feel like we were talking about regeneration at this point too. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. Yeah, I think this is when we were talking about like, can you still regenerate the sheets based on spreadsheets? So if I got that wrong, let me know in the chat. But you know, in this case, we did download, upload from an existing sheet. Now, I have my figures in here that I uploaded, right? If something changes here though, and I want to pull my more current fiscal figures, or I have other accounts that I wanted to pull, I can use regenerate. I can do this again. However, warning signs, it will remove what I have in my proposed amount column. So I'm going to regenerate this. Okay, regenerated. But when we take a look here, look, I've got my 300 again, because that's what my original parameters that my sheet is built on. And then my PA column is zeros because we regenerated. That's like, you know, we're starting from scratch. Give me the new things that I didn't have on there. Give me the new figures. And so that's also going to clear out anything that's in there. Yeah, that's a great question. So, okay. So we've hit most of the things on here. The other thing that I want to touch on is deleting a sheet. So I do want to mention, and I think we have a potential update in the future to help with this, but one thing to keep in mind is that as you're creating these sheets, each account should only be in one sheet. So I pulled in my high school, and so say in this like scenario, I would pull a sheet for each of my schools, for each of my groups. In my example scenario here, I also have a sheet that has everything in the general fund, which if I'm going to break it out into schools, I don't want to also have the sheet for the whole general fund because I may have accounts in multiple places. So you want to watch out for that. But what I can do is I can delete this one, delete this budgeting sheet. Okay. And that just removes it from my scenario. If there is a situation where an account does end up in multiple sheets, at the next step when it gets promoted to proposed amounts, it's only going to have one row for those. So if you had like one with an amount and one with a zero, like the amount could get overwritten. So you want to be careful with that. So let's save this up because say we're good to go now. And this is our scenario. Let me make it smaller again so I can see. So we have our scenario for this year. Let's see. We talked about the upload. Let's go to, here's our scenario steps. I just wanted to show this. I know we talked about these worksheets earlier, but right within the walkthrough, there is an option for these sheets, and these are report definitions. So if that is something that is preferred to use here, let me just download. I might already have this in my instance, but I'll show you. So you click right on this, it downloads the report definition. And report manager. Okay, and we're gonna do import report. And I can import this budget worksheet, my name on it to make it different instead of a 2. And that's going to add add this report to our report library, to our report manager. I could go run this. It's set to run to Excel data. And then I have the ability to filter. So let's do our OPU here we were working with. And we'll generate that report real quick. So what that's going to do is that is going to give us a spreadsheet very similar to what we already saw. So enable editing. See, I have my fields on here. I have my account code. I have my different number of fields, and I have the PA field, and I could go fill this out. And so this has all the information where I could populate this and then go ahead and upload it to a scenario. But again, if I'm doing it this way, where I have my report from the report manager, then when I go into my scenario, I need to use the option at the bottom to upload. So how I think about it is both of these two options are creating a brand new line on the budgeting sheet grid here. Okay, all right. We spent a good amount of time on that, but we had some really great questions, so thank you all. Let's go ahead and promote this now. So promote scenario, this is the step that's actually going to go ahead and push it over to our proposed amounts grid. Actually, let me cancel here. If I go to proposed amounts, I had like a little test run in here of the accounts. So I had amounts already in my proposed amounts grid. I mean, these are zeros for fiscal year 26 for budgets and for the revenues. Now, this is where it kind of becomes important when we were talking about, having things together in a scenario, because when we promote this, it says promoting will replace all existing proposed amounts, both expenditure and revenue, for fiscal years related to this scenario, even if you're not promoting for that account type. So even if my scenario has no anticipated revenues in it, it's still going to overwrite it, and then I'm going to have no revenue in my current proposed amounts. So that is, we've clarified this error a couple times actually, or this informational message a couple times to try and help make that clear, because we really want to make sure that these get pushed forward as intended. So let's go ahead and promote, because that will take a minute. Oh, it's pretty fast, huh? I guess I do just have like an example scenario. Sometimes that step may take a minute because it's pushing forward all of those different accounts. So if we go over to proposed amounts, let's see here. Okay. So again, this is a second kind of stage of like a holding area is how I think of it. Let's look up our accounts that we have here that have amounts in it. Oh, I didn't put the amounts in there. Dang it. Okay. Let's go back. Edit our scenario. I think we just need to re-upload our sheet, huh? Yeah, because we regenerated it. Let's do that. Oop. I gotta choose the file first. That's what I get for going quick here. All right. All right, start upload. There we go. Here, okay, so we have amounts here. That's what I missed. We regenerated, so I didn't have amounts there. I'm gonna resave my scenario and we're gonna go ahead and promote it again. Okay, all right, now we switch to the proposed amounts grid. And let's look up our OPU. So here are the accounts that we're kind of working with for an example. You can see we have the different amounts in here. Now, once you're in here, you can edit these amounts. So we could change the amounts right within here without having to go back to the scenario step. The important thing to keep in mind with that, though, is if you do ever re-promote the scenario, so if you make changes in this grid, then you make changes in the scenario and you push the scenario forward again, you'll lose anything. It's going to completely overwrite what you have in here. So again, this is one where it's not that you can't do it. You just definitely may want to consider like what the actual process and plan is. If you're at a point where you know you're not going to go back and re-promote that scenario, then sure, you can make edits in this page. You could even like add if there's an account that wasn't included in the scenario and you want to go ahead and add that and add a budget for it. You could do that from this grid. So it's definitely flexible. It's definitely still a working area. The other thing I want to show at this point is when we're in here, let's go back to our expenditure grid. And let me see if I have to refresh this page. I think I do. No, I don't. Okay. So this is one of my accounts that we just looked at for my budget, right, in the proposed amounts. So if I scroll down here, I have next year proposed, and this shows that 1,500, which if you recall, that's the one that I just edited too. We had 500, I made it 1,500. So this field on the account is going to show what's in the proposed amount grid. What's in this proposed amount grid. If I delete this out of my proposed amount grid, this will then become 0. So this is specifically in the situation of my current period in my software is fiscal year 25. I have a proposed amount in the proposed amount grid for 26. So when we talk about the case of being careful about what may get overwritten in this proposed amount grid, that is the exact reason why. Because and this is where it becomes tricky with the situation like Andrew mentioned, where if you have to post revenues ahead of time and then post expenditures later, really it's not that it can't be done. The key is figuring out the impacts and what you're okay with as far as this figure showing. So if you need this figure to show on the next year proposed, then it needs to remain in the proposed amount grid. Where that can be important is those figures I know can be used, the next year proposed can be used for entering future year requisitions, entering future year purchase orders. There are checks against that can use this figure as the next year proposed. So if you go through and do the proposed amounts, we're gonna see in the next step where you post the actual budgets to July, they could be sitting out there and waiting, but if they're not in that proposed amount grid, then this figure may not show correctly. So that's really the concern. When we talk about, you know, hey, be careful of overwriting this, that's really the concern. Now, also on that note, this time of year, like we're doing the budget, it's still 2025, but the next year proposed is 2026. That next year proposed amount is important. As soon as you hit July, this is no longer relevant. It's the actual budget. So as soon as you hit July, if you need to go in and do anything in this proposed amounts grid that would overwrite it, doesn't matter. So that's my other thought with, you know, and it's hard to say with the exact situation, but the situation that was mentioned earlier where they may need to post the revenues ahead of time, but the expenditures don't get posted until, you know, after the new fiscal year is started. Well, in that case, like, you know, whatever they leave in the proposed amounts grid up until the new year, that's what, you know, if they need those next year figures, they should have it there. But when they go to post expenditures, you know, if it's happening anytime after July of the new year, it doesn't matter if you overwrite this grid because you're no longer using next year proposed figures. So certainly something that is, you know, with like each situation, kind of depends on, you know, what you're looking at and thinking it out that way. But I just kind of wanted to talk through a little bit and give it some context. Okay. Alrighty, so we talked about viewing and editing, we talked about creating. All right, the last step we have is to talk about applying. And then I want to mention just a little bit about adjustments. So I see we've already made it to an hour and I've talked a whole lot today. I'm going to keep going, but I do understand, you know, usually we try and keep these to an hour. So if anybody has to go, you know, I totally understand that we are recording, we'll have this posted. But I will be, for where we're at now, I will be going over. So we'll keep going. Okay. All right, so once we have everything set in our proposed amounts grid, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to apply. And hang on, let me refresh this page because I want to show you something here. So we have our apply button here. I was looking at this drop down earlier because I could pick, like, if I just want to see the 25 budget that I have in there and the 26 budget, I can filter, I can use this little drop down to filter, but that also has me select a fiscal year. If I don't do that and I click apply, I will get an error. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. So go ahead and choose 26. The other thing to keep in mind, if I were to try and select certain accounts, my apply goes away. If I were to filter this grid, doesn't matter. When I'm applying everything for this fiscal year that is in my proposed amount grid. So just keep that in mind. The apply is, you know, it's not like a select a couple or like filter and have just a couple at a time to apply. Like whatever you have for the year, both the budgets and the revenues with that year is going to be applied. So let's do this and I'll talk a little bit more about like what does that mean it's applied. Okay, so we click apply and this process will set temporary permanent initial budget or revenue amounts for the selected fiscal year. And then if the period doesn't exist, I'll create it. So the first important key here is transaction type. We have temporary, permanent, or adjustment. So temporary versus permanent budgets, honestly, they're very similar in how they work. Temporary is probably what they would do first. That's, you know, I'm getting my budgets in, you know, ahead of time so that it's there. So there's funds there for them to start posting maybe like their future year transactions against. But obviously those don't actually get, you know, fully confirmed until later on. So those are typically posted first. It does update the initial amounts. You can have multiple waves of temporary, like so if you were to post a temporary budget and then you want to go ahead and post it again, you can post as temporary multiple times. Permanent, so that usually happens later. You could, there's no like rule where you have to post temporary and then permanent. But permanent, that would usually be later to update the initial amounts. And the key here is once the amounts are posted as permanent, you can't go back and post a temporary over that. So and let me just clarify first, if you're applying, like if you're applying a temporary budget and then you apply a temporary budget again, it's going to overwrite the previous initial amounts. If I have a temporary budget already applied and I apply as permanent, it will overwrite the amounts that you previously had as the initial amounts for temporary. However, once I post a permanent budget, I can't go back and post a temporary to overwrite it. Temporary won't overwrite a permanent. So that's the one catch there. And then adjustment is the other option. So, okay, apply the other field, or so for the other fields under apply, this update original estimate amount, and actually let's post it as a temporary update gap original estimate amounts. We can check or uncheck this if we're doing temporary. What this does is there is, hang on, let's look at the account. So we have this gap original budget here. The first time that I post with this checked, it is going to add we do like budget adjustments. Let me show you here. We have a gap initial budget that gets posted. And so here, oh no, so that's different. So gap initial is just the very first time, whether it's temporary or permanent, that you apply with this checkbox marked, it's going to make this gap initial amount on here. In subsequent, like if you then go post it later as a permanent and have that checked, it will use a gap adjustment so that the amount that shows here is updated. So, you know, if you have that checked, that is going to say, okay, this, I want, you know, whatever I'm posting at this point to update this figure for the gap original budget. And that's used for the gap extract. Let's see. So the effective date is going to be 7/1, whether that's temporary or permanent. Both ones we're talking about right now. Because we're gonna, you know, the budgets are always going to show, like the initial is going to apply for essentially the full year from the start of the year. If you're doing adjustments, this is able to be modified. You can edit the date. And then the full year checkbox. So my understanding, I believe this is really mostly like a reference informational field. So you could use these. There are certain reports that you can pull with like the budgeting transactions, which shows like initial or any adjustments. When you're posting permanent budgets, you can't uncheck it, but for temporary budgets, you could uncheck this to signify that the initial budgets could change during the year. So the example that I have is like maybe you posted, maybe the temporary budgets were posted, but then it depends on if the levy passes or fails. You know, those might not necessarily be full year budgets, and the permanent budget is gonna post later. Again, if you don't uncheck this, you could still do that in the process. So I don't think it's gonna prevent you from doing that, but just informationally, this gives an option to check or uncheck. So, so let's go ahead and apply these. All right, and again, this will take a minute to process because it's going to go ahead and what it's going to do is go through, it's creating, I don't know that I actually have July created ahead of time in this one, so it might be actually making the posting period too. But it's going to set up initial budgets for everything in our grid for July of 2026. Well, 2025, fiscal year 26. Okay. So proposed amount successful. Excellent. Now let's take a look and see what this did. because I'm over here on my account grid. And when I take a look, let me get back to my example accounts. We're looking at our account. Okay, so we talked about this. This comes from the proposed amount grid, right? If I just, look at this, I really don't see anything different. And again, that's because what I just did by applying is putting an amount in July. I'm pre-setting up that budget so that as soon as I switch to my new fiscal year, it's already set to go. So as you can see in my top corner, I'm February 25. But let's go through and change our posting period. So see, July created on 2/14. So when I posted those budgets, it made my posting period. I can go ahead, just make it current so that I'm viewing my system now as of July. And when we take a look here, you can see now, so my GAAP original budget, my initial budget, that's our amount. And if I just open the budgeting adjustments here, we can see, I should have oh, it's because I posted as temporary. So I can see my GAAP initial, the temporary entry is what's making this, so we can't see it on that grid, sorry. But as of 7/1, that apply step, the last step that we did with apply, is what makes it show here once we're in July. Now, here's like another part of the equation, just since we were talking about some different scenarios earlier. Once I apply these in July, they're gonna stay there. So if I'm, if I apply those in July, and this is where I think some districts, like if they do want to talk about, okay, doing these in waves, once I go back to my proposed amounts grid, like I could delete them out of here and they're still set for July. So at this point, now that I've applied them, outside of applying again, anything else that I do in this grid, as long as it's not, click apply, that won't impact any budgets that I've already applied. So if I go, delete this out of here, so I'm deleting my row with our example account here. And then go back to my account page. Because I deleted that out of proposed amounts, I don't have a next year proposed now. One more place to look. We'll go change the posting period back to July. So good measure, we're just going to take a look all around. Okay, so now we're July 25, where we posted the budgets. But when I come in here, it's still the initial budget. So that's the difference. And I hope that I'm not making it too confusing by jumping around like I did, but I just wanted to visually show, that's the difference. So having it in proposed amounts grid is next year proposed. Applying it is always going to apply it in July. And once it's applied, then like whatever you do in proposed amounts, if you delete it out of the grid, it's not going to affect, having it been applied already. So if there are those situations, that you're helping districts out with, where it's a little bit more complicated on how they need to do it, based on like their policy or based on, what they're trying to accomplish, I just kind of wanted to show, the key of how that works. Okay. Okay. Any questions? All right. Well, last thing then, so the other walkthrough we have here is click here for making budgeting adjustments in the current fiscal year. The process itself is very similar to what we looked through with our example. So you use the scenarios, proposed amounts, all of your big steps, you know, are the same. We had a great question earlier talking about, you know, maybe even using the clone option to create the scenario for the adjustments. Now, the keys here are that PA column header. So when we looked at that, the PA column header, go here, within the individual sheets. So whatever this column is, when you're creating the sheets, needs to be the actual fiscal year that you want to post it for. So creating a new sheet at this point is going to default to 26. If you want to do adjustments that are still in 25, this is what the header is going to look like. The other thing, and I scrolled here, so this is on my walkthrough for adjustments, is the other thing to keep in mind. When you're creating adjustments through the budgeting pages, through scenarios, through proposed amounts, the amount that you enter as the PA amount should be what you want the expendable to be, not the amount that you're adjusting by. So if you think about it, like when you go in to like an individual account, let's go on this page. Okay. So when we go into an individual account, let me get out of July first too. Go back to February. Okay, now we're going to the accounts. So here, get in here. So in this case, you know, I don't have any budget right now, but if I wanted to add a budget adjustment, you know, I would come in here and, you know what, let's give this an initial amount for our example, okay? Hopefully that doesn't, okay, it did let me add it in July. All right, cool. So, we have, so this is our initial amount, and then let's add an adjustment. So I'm going to add an adjustment for $100, okay? And then I'll show you what we're looking at with our totals, because I know I just did a couple things quickly there. All right, so here's our example situation. Our initial budget is 500. I just added an adjustment for 100. My expendable amount then is 600, okay? So I'm going to delete this budget adjustment now. So this is my manual adjustment. And then let's talk about what that would look like if we were to do it through like the spreadsheet, which obviously if you have one, you're going to do it this way. But, you know, there's cases right now where they probably have a whole bunch on a spreadsheet that they'd want to upload. So in this case, we have our initial, and then we want to have an adjustment of 100 so that we end up at 600. Okay. So when we come in here, let's do, let's clone this real quick. I think this is worth, there we go. And what I'm going to do is, let's see. I'm going to delete everything but just the one account that we're using as the example here. Okay, and let's edit this. So I believe we're using that first account there. Yeah. All right. Okay, so first adjustments, change our header. 2025. Now we can see, look, here's my expendable amount currently is 500. Okay. So what I want to enter in here is I want to enter in 600 because that's what I want the expendable to be. And so we have that yellow box explains an example and explains this, but that's one of the catches because I know when you're manually entering, you know, you might think like 100, but no, PA is proposed amount. So what am I proposing for the new expendable? So it's 600. So we go ahead and do that. You know what? I'm just gonna go ahead, we'll go through the process. I didn't fully plan to go through this far in the example, but we're already there. I think we do it. So adjustments 25. I'm gonna promote this. This is going to promote for 25, so it won't overwrite my 26 budgets. Promotion successful, and let's go to our proposed amounts. And again, this dropdown lets me select a year. It also filters our grid for that year. So when I do this, I can see, okay, this is my 25. This is all I have in here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Let's apply it as an adjustment. Now here is where, so this update gap original is unchecked, but we're adding it as an adjustment, so that's okay. The effective date, I'm going to go ahead and pick today's date here because I'm going to enter this as an adjustment in this current month. Full year, I can, oh yeah, I guess I need to have that checked. And then apply. Again, full year, I believe it is just largely an informational fill. I actually I was looking into that one quite a bit more. And yeah, the main place that we have it noted is for the temporary budgets. So it's interesting. All right, so I've applied as an adjustment now. Let me go back here. I'm gonna need to refresh this page. Okay. So see, we applied and then it went ahead and it calculates the adjustment based on the expendable that we put in. Here, we should be able to see here. So here's the adjustment created from proposed budget. So it is able to figure out based on the existing amount, based on what you said, here's what I want the expendable to be. It does the math to come up with the adjustment. So, sorry, here's the adjustment one. So this is the block that gives the description of that. A lot of these other steps are very similar to what we talked about with the, you know, with creating the general budget. So the promoting steps the same, seeing those in proposed amounts, we kind of took a look at that, and then applying, you know, that transaction type. You just have, it's key to choose it as adjustment. Okay. All right, so that wraps it up for our budgeting part. I do have a couple notes to talk about with the upcoming trainings too. So if you have any other questions on budgeting, please feel free to still ask or drop them in the chat while I am going to happen to look at some of the future training stuff. Okay. Because exciting, this is like our, I mean, we've had the release recap so far, but this is our first Fridays with Fiscal, I believe, of 25. So that's pretty exciting. We have some fun things, you know, coming up for this year. We go through each of your suggestions that we get throughout the year for different things, and try and come up with the best training schedule that we have. Actually, as soon as the session ends, it's going to pop up a survey in the browser. And so, you know, if you like this training, if you have other things that you want to see in trainings in the future, please fill it out. Please put those in there because we always go back through those when we're thinking of ideas for conferences or when planning for next year. So, all right, so here we are budgeting. This is where the recording will be after the fact. On the 21st, next week, we're going to have a quarter end closing USPS training. So that's really exciting. We have our February release recap at the beginning of March. And then we'll also have this brand new session, ITC support resources is a new one that we're trying this year. We're definitely going to be talking about JIRA and some good stuff that we've talked about before. But we kind of just put that together with the idea of having something like, hey, you know, what are all the different things that you may use through us, and just having all of that information in one spot. you know, whether it's somebody who's new to the ITC or some of you that have been there for a while, you know, a lot of times going through that stuff, it's just something where, you know, you might come across something that's like, hey, wait, oh, I didn't know that. So that's our goal there. I see a raised hand. Jessica, do you have a question? Sometimes those hands get raised. No? Okay. Well, I don't want to cut you off if you do have a question, but I've totally raised my hand on accident before, so I'm not sure. Okay. So the other thing I want to mention before, okay, yeah, that's totally fine. I understand. The other thing I want to mention is OECN United. So this is an ITC conference at the end of March. We have noted on here SSDT will be conducting sessions at the conference. Refers to the agenda for the session topics. So we will be conducting 2 sessions. We'll be doing a preview of Ippy Dippy and an overview of Document Store. So I heard there was maybe a little bit of confusion with, like, I don't know if it was the timing of when the agenda was like sent out or updated, if we were going to be there or not. And so I just wanted to let you all know who are on the call today that, like, yes, SSDT will be having sessions there. So that's that. Well, thank you all for sticking with me a little bit longer today. And thank you for the excellent questions. Happy Valentine's Day. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Amanda. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.